Welcome to Green Building Matters, the original and most popular podcast focused on the green building movement. Your host is Charlie Cicchetti, one of the most credentialed experts in the green building industry and one of the few to be honored as a lead fellow. Each week, Charlie welcomes a green building professional from around the globe to share their war stories, career advice, and unique insight into how sustainability is shaping the built environment. So settle in, grab a fresh cup of coffee, and get ready to find out why green building matters.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of the Green Building Matters podcast, where I get to interview a green or healthy building professional somewhere in the world every single week. I have a blast doing it. Today, we've got Grant Morgan. He's the co-founder and CEO at RZero out in Salt Lake City, Utah. Hey, Grant, how you doing today?
Just living the dream, Charlie. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Oh, you're welcome, man. I love to talk in a minute. Entrepreneurship, healthy buildings, some of the work you're doing. But I've got to ask, take us back. So where'd you grow up and where'd you go to school?
Yeah. So I grew up in a place called Folsom, California. It's right outside of Sacramento. Most people know it because of the Johnny Cash Folsom Prison Blues song. I did not grow up at the prison for the record, but grew up in Folsom. And so a California kid, born and bred, ended up going to college at Cal Poly down in San Luis Obispo and studied mechanical engineering there. And that's, I guess, funny anecdote is when I was applying to colleges, when you apply to Cal Poly, you actually have to declare your major when you apply. And like 17-year-old Grant didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, but I figured, hey, I'm good at math and I like Legos, so let's try this mechanical engineering thing. And the rest is history. It really worked out for me.
Man, that's fantastic. And what a beautiful place to go to college too, right there. I mean, on the coast, Pacific Coast Highway and up and down. So what'd you do for fun there in college? I really like that part of the country.
Yeah. I think Oprah named it the happiest place on earth, which if Oprah says so, it's gotta be true. But no, I think it was a very special part of my life. And I think if there was any reasonable amount of industry there, I don't know that I would have left. But we spent a lot of time at the beach. The beach, the ocean is it's rejuvenating to me. It gives me energy, and it's just a fun, nice place to hang out. But did a lot of that. Played a lot of sort of intramural sports outside, and typical college kid stuff. So it was an absolute blast.
Love it, man. Thanks. That's a special part of the country. All right. So you get this mechanical engineering degree, but then you go to Abbott and you start maybe getting to medical and health. So tell us, how did that come about?
Yeah. So it kind of started when I was in college and when I was starting to think about what I wanted to do after school. A lot of my peers in my engineering program were going into different industries, from energy and oil and gas to the automotive industry and everything in between. And that was the point where I decided that I wanted to do something and apply myself in a way that at the end of the day, it was helping other people. And so I ended up interning for Abbott actually 3 times for 3 summers while I was still in school. Fell in love with the company, met a lot of incredible people. It was a massive company with tons of opportunity. And so when I graduated, I ended up interviewing and getting into their management development program, where they move you around every 6 months to different business units, different functions, different parts of the world, and got to get a pretty holistic view of what Abbott does, all their different divisions, from nutrition to pharmaceuticals to medical devices to diagnostics, medical optics, vascular, in hematology. I think that's the full list. But got to live in really cool places like Columbus, Ohio, which is actually surprisingly amazing. Shout out to Columbus and go Buckeyes. But I lived in Chicago, lived back in the Bay Area, and I also got to live in Puerto Rico for a short period of time as well. So really, really grateful for that experience. Met a ton of great people, got to work on some amazing projects, and ultimately, kind of fast forwarding to the end of my Abbott tenure, one of the things I realized there was that I wanted a bigger slice of the pie and a larger scope of responsibility, and thought I was capable of more than what the opportunity was that was being presented to me. And 90,000 person healthcare conglomerate. It's easy to see how there's a lot of structure and sort of glass ceilings in different places. And so I wanted to try something smaller, which is ultimately why I left. But I look back on my time at Abbott extremely fondly, and it taught me a ton that has influenced the trajectory of my career.
Fun. I love it. So now let's talk, what's next? Entrepreneurship? Tell us startups, tech, like what's that next chapter after you left Abbott?
Yeah. So I left Abbott and actually stayed in the healthcare industry. I went to a smaller medical device startup. At the time, it was called NDC for Nitinol Devices and Components. And now they're called Confluent. They're pretty massive now. But when I joined, we specialized in making nitinol, which is a special nickel titanium alloy with very special properties that make it conducive to medical device applications. But we specialized in nitinol applications for medical devices. So I got to stand up and lead our neurovascular value stream. So we made medical devices specific for neurovascular therapies. And so my team would basically take a napkin sketch from the big dogs like Stryker, J&J, Medtronic, Abbott even. And we would take that napkin sketch and the idea of a therapy that they wanted to bring to market. And then my team would be responsible for figuring out how to design, develop, and manufacture it, and ultimately scale up the manufacturing, take them through sort of the FDA and clinical trials, and then scale manufacturing and ship it off to a lower cost place. And so I learned a lot. I got a lot larger scope of responsibility that I was looking for, and had a fantastic time there. And the team that I worked with was incredible and achieved quite a bit of success in various different ways. But shortly after that, I decided to depart the medical device industry and healthcare in general, and got into tech and entrepreneurialism. So I jumped ship and started a company called iCracked with a buddy of mine from college. And we started as on-demand phone repair. So we were like the Uber for iPhone repair, essentially. And when I jumped ship, my buddy was saying, "Hey, why don't you come start this thing with me?" And I was like, "Well, what would I do? I know medical devices and I know the physical world, and this is a tech company very squarely." And he's like, "I have no idea what you're going to do, but come on over." And I said, "Cool, I'm in. Let's do it." And so I think my original title was some nebulous director of special projects or something like that. But I ended up leading the product and engineering teams there. And that's where I fell in love with software. So it was pretty wild to me that you could mash your fleshy fingers on a keyboard and push some code and fundamentally change the way people interact with the world. And so learned a ton there, mostly from my team, who was patient enough to and willing enough to teach me. But grew that company for 6 or 7 years. Eventually branched into IoT, smart home installation and setup, and other sorts of on-demand technical services. And I think at our peak, we had over 20,000 independently contracted technicians all over North America and Europe that we could deploy to go perform any sort of on-demand technical service. And eventually ended up, getting acquired by Allstate, which was sort of my first taste of an exit. So it felt really good to have built something that somebody wanted, and it was a fantastic experience. The other thing I learned there, and the other thing that happened was it really lit my entrepreneurial fire. So before that, I thought starting a company and raising money and building and whatnot was this nebulous black box, and I just thought that you had to have special skills or something. What I learned was the dirty secret is really nobody knows what they're doing. And anyone by and large can give it a shot and try. But I kind of had that realization when I was walking out of Andreessen Horowitz, who led our Series A. And, I walked into the meeting looking at all the partners. I'm like, I read your blog. I've read your book. I follow you on Twitter. It's these sort of people that you fantasize as icons and these people you look up to, and you're sitting in a room to them, telling them about your idea of what you're going to build. And it's really humbling and exciting to walk out with, a $15 million check. And when we were walking out, I was like, did they, 20-something-year-old Grant was like, do they know who they gave money to? Do they know what they just did? And so once you get one of those wins under your belt, you gain the confidence and realize that, other entrepreneurs are just people, and everyone's just they're all human. We all have our own quirks and limitations and strengths, and nobody knows what they're doing. So it was really empowering for me, empowering experience, and it had a happy ending too. So it was awesome.
Thank you for that. You're a good storyteller. And then that kind of gets us, let's just go ahead and talk about RZero. So, right, this pandemic hits. I know in my world, we've had green buildings for a long time. We do a lot of lead work. There's other programs and fit well we like to work in with our commercial real estate. Pandemic hits and it's like, whoa, is this a healthy building or not? What are we doing with our pandemic response? And I think that allowed you guys to start the next company, right? So tell us that story.
Yeah. So the origin story is actually really interesting. And this whole thing has been kind of this, amalgamation of my past circumstances and this alignment of stars, watching this all come together. But, you mentioned healthy buildings and LEED certification, but, the green buildings movement has very successfully reduced carbon emissions from one of the largest emitters, being commercial real estate and in the built environment. But one of the consequences is, in order to make buildings more energy efficient, you have to seal them up. And so, I think that presents an opportunity, but I'll get back to that in a second. But the origin story for RZero was, I actually got a call at the beginning of the pandemic from one of my co-founders, Ben Boyer, who actually was on my board at iCracked, my first company. He was always someone we looked up to, respected, always wanted to figure out how to work with in the future. Never thought it would be in this capacity of him operating with us, but here we are. So he called me and he pitched me the idea of like iCracked for disinfection. That was actually the original idea. And I was like, I know how to build that. Let's do it. And what we found out was, when we went to go buy equipment, and that we were going to, give to these independently contracted technicians that we would deploy to perform some disinfection service above and beyond what a normal janitorial or custodial staff would do. When we went to go buy these things, these UVC light towers that were sold into hospitals, we realized they're, anywhere from $80,000 to $125,000. So we thought the idea was dead in the water. And I ended up going deep and I was looking at these things. I'm like, that's a light bulb on wheels with the timer. There's no way it can be that expensive to make. And so I kind of reverse engineered it, did some math and, back of the envelope calculations and figured out that you could make one for significantly less than what they were charging. So I called Ben back and I was like, you're going to think I'm crazy, but we're building lights. And he's like, all right, let's do it. You're crazy, but I'm in. And we were off to the races. But, along the way, we had a couple of realizations that really shaped who we are and where we're going, and where we've been. But, the first thing was, we realized this is one of those moments throughout history where everything changes. And, we started looking back at other historic events like the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, which out of that, came modern hand hygiene. No one washed their hands before that, for example. Then you look at 9/11, which is something more relatable because I was alive at that time. But out of 9/11 came basically the entire Homeland Security apparatus. So we founded the Department of Homeland Security. We hired 14,000 TSA agents. Still can't take a water bottle or wear your shoes through security. And then there was also a private industry that was spawned to support this security apparatus. So think like the Palantirs of the world. And so point being, the realization was there are massive societal and infrastructural changes that come out of these historic events, that change the course of history. And we thought this was going to be one, but those consequences and those changes would be much larger in scale and magnitude, given the global nature, the magnitude of the loss of lives, the economic devastation that was happening. And so that was kind of like the insight that really led us to go start a business during a pandemic. But a couple of the other realizations that we had that really shaped how we think about the world is, at the beginning of the pandemic, I'm sure you can probably relate, everyone can, to this experience. But everyone's wiping down their groceries with Clorox wipes. And I had a quarantine box in my garage where come home from the grocery store and you take off your hazmat suit, And I had this light bulb moment where I was like, we're still using the same archaic chemicals to fight COVID in 2020 that we used to fight the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. And in that same 100 years, we've seen innovation and technology proliferate throughout virtually every other industry. We're sending people to space. We're now actually landing rockets on autonomous drone boats in the middle of the ocean for reuse. We've seen the internet. We've seen the proliferation of self-driving cars, but we're still using the same archaic chemicals, which leads me to another realization as we started looking into it. the reality of chemicals are that they, there's a number of issues with them, but number one, they're harmful to the environment. They're a petrochemical intensive production process. You're shipping, a 7-pound gallon of, Clorox bleach all over the world, which is very carbon intensive and energy intensive. You've got, there all kinds of issues with the environment, but then they're also harmful to humans. There are tons of studies proving that occupational exposure to these chemicals cause severe respiratory issues like COPD, which is one of the leading killers in the United States. And they trigger allergies, asthma, things like that. But they're harmful to humans, harmful to the planet. And frankly, they don't work. And if you look at, there are a couple of reasons for this, but number one, if you look at like the label on your Lysol that's under your sink, there's a thing called contact time. And that contact time is the amount of time that a surface has to stay visibly wet with the chemical in order for it to achieve the claim that it's making, like kills 99% of germs or whatever. I don't know about you, but I've never, ever left a surface wet for 8 to 10 minutes, which is the contact time for a lot of these chemicals, before wiping it off. It's spray on, wipe off. So they're not doing what you think they're doing. Number two, if you look at the evidence, the data of how healthy people are, if you look at the data from before COVID, it's stark. 40 million Americans get the flu every year, and somehow we've just accepted that that's normal. MRSA, or staph infections, kill more people annually in the United States than emphysema, Parkinson's, AIDS, and homicide combined. So, we've just done a terrible job at keeping people safe in what amounts to being our natural habitat, which is indoor spaces. And the tools that we've been using, chemicals, are just inadequate. And so, we came to this realization that, there needs to be technology and innovation in this space at this moment in time, especially. The need has never been more urgent or apparent. Number two, the tools and technologies exist. You look at some of the technologies that we're using for air and surface disinfection. They've been around for over 100 years. UVC, the Nobel Prize for medicine was awarded to Niels Finsen in 1903 for the use of UVC to treat lupus. And so, the pieces exist. We just have to put them together in the right way with a modern technological sort of lens. And we can do this more efficiently, more effectively, more sustainably than we've ever done it before. So that's kind of the origin story, a little bit long-winded, but yeah.
No, thanks. I wanted to get the whole story and get to today because, it fits into our world and the listeners here with not just green buildings, and you've hit a lot on carbon, right? It's anything we do, ESG, let's talk carbon, and you've tied what your company's doing into that. It just makes sense to me. But of course, healthy buildings. But before we move on, tell me about mentors. When you look back to maybe open the door for you, you might call a mentor. Yeah,
there have been so many different people that have been influential in my career. I'll name a few of them, but unfortunately, the list is too long. We don't have enough time on this podcast, but to thank everybody. But my dad always used to say, and still does, I guess, that you become who you surround yourself with. And that was really impactful to me. And I was always paying attention and paying mind to the people that I was spending time with because, they influence who I am, who I become. And a couple of the mentors, early on, a guy named Steve Pretry, who was an early mentor of mine at iCracked. And he was kind of brought him in. He was kind of the adult supervision in the room. And he was extremely influential. We connected on a personal level. I know his family, and he was always in my corner, always had my back, but always called my bullshit and told me how it was, because he knew that I had a desire to get better, and he had experienced things that could benefit me in my career. And so he was super influential. And actually, he's on my board now at RZero. And so he became a venture capitalist in the last couple of years and has been following what we're doing and ended up, leading our Series B. Another person more recently that I definitely want to acknowledge is Ira Ehrenpreis. So he's on the board of Tesla, first investor in SpaceX, and he's sort of built a career out of investing in companies that are disrupting these archaic industries that people don't think can be disrupted. the other thing is he's one of the pioneers of impact investing. So he's been doing impact investing since the 90s and is a stalwart in the industry and extremely successful. But he founded a firm called DBL Partners, which is double bottom line. First bottom line is financial success. So they invest in companies that produce top tier venture capital returns. The second bottom line is social and environmental impact. And so when he led our Series A, we signed a pledge, a double bottom line pledge. And we're fortunate enough to have lots of options for the Series A, but we wanted an investor who was aligned with our values. And Ira and the DBL team could not be more aligned with our values. And the pledge we took was, that we will do good while doing well as a company. And so it has influenced the culture and the fabric of the company, how we operate and how we see the world. But he's been unbelievably influential in making me better every day. So he's like that coach you had when you played sports that makes you run the extra lap, that do the extra rep. He knows I'm a competitor and he pushes me to get better. And then, he's one of those people that when he talks, when he says words, they're profound. And he speaks from incredible experience. And then the other thing is like the guy's on the board of Tesla and he spends he used to call me 3 times a day. We were on the phone 3 times a day sometimes. And so the amount of time and energy that he spends and invests in us being successful and me personally being successful is humbling. And it's been a huge, huge accelerant to my career and in our company's trajectory.
That's great. What a great set of mentors. I know you've had others, and this is this current chapter. So thank you for sharing. I'm really excited to hear where you're at with the company and really what's next. What are some of your proudest achievements as you look back?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple. So one of them is back to NDC, that medical device startup that I worked for when I led the neurovascular value stream. So we produced a product called Trevo, which is a Stryker sells it. And it's a class of device called neurovascular stent trever. And it treats ischemic stroke. So that's when you have a blood clot in your brain that's blocking the flow of blood downstream. And historically, the way that they treated them was they'd pump you full of blood thinners and they'd dissolve the clot until it dislodged and kind of worked its way through your system. The problem with that is blood thinners are systemically awful for you. Your kidneys, your liver have to filter them out and they're really, really bad for you. And they produce systemic issues. What we did was, I guess you could call this like old school or brute force, but we built this device. It looks like a stent with a little tail and you feed it up your carotid artery and into the brain, and you push it through the clot, and then you unsheath it, and it expands into the clot, and then you just pull it out, and you get immediate relief of the blockage, and it doesn't cause systemic issues either. Like people can be talking during the procedure; it's pretty wild. But it was so successful clinically that it got fast tracked for approval, 510(k) and FDA approval because they wanted more patients to get this treatment. So that was one of my proudest sort of professional achievements. I think RZero is I will look back on RZero as probably my proudest professional achievement. But I can say that in the moment now. But being able to design, develop, manufacture a product and bring it to market in 5 months, it's the best product on the market objectively, and disrupt this industry and really start this movement is really, really special to me. So I think those are a few of my proudest accomplishments. And then on a personal side, I played drums and I was in a jazz band in high school and we got to tour Europe and we opened for Carlos Santana in Switzerland. And then we opened for Sting in Italy at a jazz festival in Perugia. So,
oh man, wow. My oldest son plays the drums. He's 13 and I'm going to have to ask you about that later. That's fantastic. That's a good icebreaker too. If you're ever doing team building, hey, who's the most famous person you've met objectively? And you got a couple of good answers there. That's good stuff.
Yeah.
No, thank you. So let's say you had a crystal ball. Like what's next in your industry? And if you could kind of connect it a little bit to kind of healthy buildings, what's next?
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of touched on this before, but I think that there's one of the consequences of making buildings more energy efficient is we've sealed them up and we've, in some cases, reduced the indoor air quality or the ventilation or whatever it may be. And I think we need to swing the pendulum back in the other direction. But one of the macro consequences of this pandemic, which I think, we're working to turn into a good thing, is we as a society now have this new awareness of the relationship between indoor spaces and human health. And actually, I would argue that your facilities manager or the person who makes decisions about the infrastructure of the built environment where you spend 90+% of your time, that person has a greater impact on your overall health than your doctor does. And I see us as a society realizing that there's an appetite there's a realization of the risk that exists, a realization of the problem that's never existed before, and there's an appetite for solutions. And so I think you're going to see a tremendous amount of innovation, companies like ours in this space, focused on improving, the healthy buildings infrastructure, and so improving indoor air quality, improving the not just efficiency or effectiveness, but the efficiency also of some of the manual disinfection that's happening. I think you're going to see. I think chemicals have peaked. I think we're going to become less and less reliant on chemicals as we develop more sustainable ways of accomplishing the same thing. But by and large, I think that we're going to see. I think that we're going to see policy changes and regulations. Like, frankly, I think it's insane that we regulate the water that we drink, maybe a liter or two of a day, but we do nothing to regulate the indoor air that we breathe, 18 to 20,000 times a day. And so I think we're going to see regulations develop around indoor air quality standards. I think we're going to see building code evolve to not only account for, but require some of this healthy buildings infrastructure as well. And I think we're going to see a lot more science, like the work that Dr. Joseph Allen, from Harvard's T.H. Chan School of Public Health has been doing around the impact of healthy buildings, not only on human health and productivity, but also on the economics and financial aspects of owning and managing commercial real estate. And so I think the proliferation of that science could not come soon enough. And I think it'll open our eyes and help people accelerate the adoption of these types of technologies. But I fundamentally believe that products like ours or other healthy buildings infrastructure or technology will be baked into every physical environment worldwide in the next, call it 10 to 20 years. And I think we're going to be better as a society for it once we realize, look, we don't have to live in a world where schools are petri dishes or the office is a place where you go to transmit the cold and the flu instead of sharing ideas. So I think that's the way the world's going.
I think your crystal ball is accurate, Grant. That's good stuff, and that definitely connects to everything we're doing. A lot of our listeners who are architects or building professionals that run buildings, we're getting all of that here. So thank you. Let's go to some kind of rapid fire questions next to learn more about you and what's kind of helping you on this journey. What's your specialty or gift? I'll answer this in two ways, professional and personal. But I think professionally, I'd say a couple of things: adaptability, curiosity, and the ability to translate more technical, scientific, or engineering concepts into approachable or relatable terms. And then on a personal note, and this is a little bit embarrassing too, but my gift is my ability to remember 90s music lyrics. Like any song I have, there's a huge part of my brain that's taken up by, every single song that I've ever heard in the 90s. And I have no idea why or how, but a song will come on the radio and I'll know every word to it. So a gift or a curse, you choose. Love that, man. My wife and I were away recently and we were trying to reminisce and talk about our high school years. And I'm not good at remembering lyrics. She knows the lyrics to every song ever, I swear. But I did remember the lyrics to all those high school years. So just what was going on in your life at that time. And I think you're going to remember those lyrics. So, hey, I think that's a good gift. And the adaptability, especially in the startup world and new industry, disruptive industry, I know you got to lean into that. Now let's talk habits, routines, rituals. Do you have any good ones you could share? Yeah, a couple of them. I think some of the ones that have been most impactful. So diet and exercise have been a huge determinant of how I feel on a daily basis and ultimately how I perform. I think I treated my body kind of like a petri dish and tried everything from keto to eating vegan to intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting has been impactful for me. It's not for everybody, but first of all, it's convenient to not have to pack a lunch and stop for lunch and breakfast or whatever. And second of all, I perform better. So the premise of it is that it's eating once a day in a certain window is more aligned with how we biologically as humans have evolved over thousands of years as hunter-gatherers. So it aligns with sort of the way that our bodies are wired to secrete hormones like
like adrenaline, for example, where your body's telling you go out and hunt. So at lunch, a lot of people get the post lunchtime slump. I turn on and my body's like, go hunt. And so that's been impactful. I think from a like organization and productivity standpoint, one of the things that's been impactful is assigning themes to my days. So like Monday is my one-on-one day. So I do all my one-on-ones with my direct reports and my e-staff on Mondays. And it helps to be able to stay in the same mind space and have that touch point to set the trajectory for the week with my team. And then, theming the days reduces context switching, it helps me be a little bit more productive. Another thing that we've actually rolled out to the entire company is that I think is especially important in a remote world is we do no meetings Wednesdays. And so the premise of it is based on a book called Deep Work by Cal Christensen, I think. And the premise of it is to solve hard problems, you need long periods of uninterrupted time to go deep and actually wrap your brain around things. And so in a Zoom world, like we spend most of our day on Zoom in meetings. And communication is a little bit more challenging. And so we give the entire company the day to be able to go deep and make meaningful progress on meatier sort of projects or initiatives. And so that's been hugely productive for me too.
All these great pro tips. With the no meeting Wednesdays, is that internal and external clients too? It's like, hey, really try to free up that day, it sounds like. Yeah.
We try to keep it sacred. I end up taking some external meetings. The nature of my work has evolved, and a lot of it is external facing evangelism and things like that. And so my Wednesdays tend to get spackled with a few external meetings. But by and large, if someone's trying to put an internal meeting on my calendar, I don't take it. I like to just. I tell people just pick up the phone, call me, and we don't need to schedule something and block time or whatever. Like let's have a conversation if needed. So yeah,
that's awesome, man. Intermittent fasting and that window, deep work. We'll put a link to that. Cal Newport there, just a great big fan of that and deep work. So thanks for sharing. I'm a fan of a bucket list. Is there one or two things that you could share? Any adventure, travel, write a book? What's on the bucket list?
Again, I'll go personal and professional categories here. I think in both like near and dear to my heart. And so both very personal, but one is through a professional vehicle, I would say. The personal one is I mentioned I play drums, or I used to play drums. I haven't in a while, but I want to get my chops back and go back on tour with some band. And I think it'd be a blast to get like I can get like an RV and do it sort of like pro bono, but just tour and play music and share music with people. So I think that would be an amazing bucket list item. Another one is I want to eradicate the flu. And I had, it sounds crazy, but I think we can do it. The reason why I think that's true is I remember back to, I think August of 2020, beginning of the pandemic and looking back on it, I was reading a study out of South Africa. So they were coming out of their flu season, being on the opposite hemisphere, and coming out of their flu season, they reported the number of flu cases that they had tested for and diagnosed. And typically they report about 1 million cases of the flu every year. And that year they reported one single case of the flu. And the premise of it is that the basic precautions we're taking to prevent the spread of COVID, which is one of the most infectious diseases we've ever seen as humans, those precautions are more than adequate at all but eradicating less infectious diseases like the flu. And anecdotally, I've heard a lot of people talk about like, oh, well, I didn't get sick during lockdown. Well, it makes perfect sense scientifically and logically. But I think that if we as a company can achieve the scale that I believe we will, and keep bringing novel category defining products to market that are highly efficacious, that work automatically, and that are baked into the physical infrastructure of the buildings where we spend our time, I think we can take a huge chunk out of it. And if the day that I die, if on my gravestone is Grant helped eradicate the flu, like that will be a hell of a ride and quite the success for me. And so I truly believe we will fundamentally change the way we think about keeping ourselves, humans, safe and healthy in indoor environments.
It's a hell of a ride. And it seems like you're on the right path to help with that, man. That's really cool. I love that. Next, let's talk about a book. Is there a book you'd recommend? Maybe something you recently read or listened to?
Yeah, I'm going to give you 3. 2 professional books and 1 fun sort of personal one. The 2 professional ones, one is High Output Management by Andy Groves. What's wild about that book is he wrote it in the 80s. And today in 2022, every single principle and concept that he introduces in that book is extremely relevant and accurate, true to form today, and as true as they ever were. And so that's when you know you got the principles really right, when they stand the test of time like that. But it shaped how I think about management. I think partially because I'm a lizard brain linear thinking engineer, and Andy Groves is highly technical, and he kind of draws parallels between management and a manufacturing line, for example, or a process. And so it really resonated with me and shaped how I think about management in general. Another one is a book called Amp It Up. And it's a book that's written by a guy named Frank Slootman, who is the CEO of Snowflake currently. And he's one of my sort of CEO idols, I guess. Idols carries the wrong connotation, but he's a CEO that I would love to emulate in many ways. But he's very intense, he's ruthless, and he just tells it how it is. But the Amp It Up is about building a high performance culture and instilling urgency and focus to increase your rate of progress and achieve higher quality outcomes. And so it's a really powerful book, and it has some hard truths in it. And to the extent that you can internalize those and put them into practice, it's been hugely impactful for my management style and the way that we built the team. The last book that I'll share that's on a personal note is Sapiens. It's basically the history of humans, and it goes from when we were hunter-gatherers all the way through the Industrial Revolution in modern day. And it's a fascinating read. It kind of puts into perspective who we are and why we're here, and has really interesting perspective, but it is so dense. Like every word matters, and it covers the entirety of human history. So I personally had to reread a few pages here and there, but it's absolutely fascinating. And I'd highly recommend that one for a good nighttime read, or get your brain out of work and onto something else.
Well, great recommendations to all our listeners. I'll put the links to these books in the podcast show notes, as well as Deep Work. Thanks, Grant. That's awesome, man. Last 2 questions. Let's talk career advice. Is there anything you wish you'd known earlier in your career?
Yeah, I think one of the things, I'll give you a couple. One of the things that I accidentally did, I think it wasn't super intentional, but I would give to anybody who's just starting their career: start at a big company, start at a successful company, like an Abbott for me. At Abbott, I got to learn, what success looks like, how success is measured and managed, and how you operate. I also learned a lot about what not to do. And so there were things that were in place where, you'd ask a question, why do we have to do this? And the answer is, well, that's because that's the way it's always been. And so you get to formulate your own opinions about the right way and best way to do things, and take that with you. But having examples of what success looks like and being a part of something where you're surrounded by people that you can learn from is hugely impactful, and gives you tools and a foundation to build off of if you decide to go off on your own and start your own thing. That's one. I accidentally did that, but I would absolutely be intentional about it if I was starting my career over. Another thing that I'd say is more of an entrepreneurial point, but your team matters so much. Your early hires, especially the leaders that you're hiring early, have an outsized influence on the culture and the company that you're building. Those early hires have leverage. They go build their teams, and oftentimes people hire people that think like them, that act like them, that operate and look like them sometimes. And so if you get the hire wrong, the magnitude of that, of the impact is amplified. And so, I think that this is one of those hard truths, but when somebody's not a right fit, part ways. And it's doing not only the company a favor, but them. Chances are, if it's not the right fit, the person is miserable anyway. And it doesn't have to be contentious or a negative thing. There are ways to do it amicably and make sure that you help people find the soft landing and whatnot. But that's hugely impactful in shaping your company, and it can be detrimental to your culture if you let things linger for too long. And then it's also the opportunity cost of not having the right person in the right place. So, don't be scared of it. It always hurts going into it and coming out. Every single time it's a relief, and I'd do it 10 times out of 10 over again if I didn't have to go through the experience of having the conversation, I guess. But
man, you're speaking from wisdom here. I'm taking notes myself as an entrepreneur. I love it. I love what we're doing here. Last thing is, let's say someone's listening to this podcast. They're getting excited. You've inspired them hearing your journey, and they're just now going to jump into, let's call it healthy buildings, a little more of your world. What words of encouragement do you have for them as we wrap up?
I think what you're doing is noble. I think that we have one planet, one habitat, and we're doing a very good job at destroying it. And we have a limited period of time to reverse, what we've done. And so thank you for being a part of the movement, number one. Number two, I'd say that in order to enact change and infect culture, pun intended, you have to be bold and you have to do something meaningful and impactful. And it's going to be hard, and just buckle up. That's, maybe not squarely in the bucket of like words of encouragement, but the knowing what you're getting into ahead of time is extremely important, because there are days that are real rough. And it's really hard to explain, but you often read TechCrunch or whatever, and you read about rainbows and unicorns. But what you don't see under the hood is all of the duct tape and bale wire, all of the scar tissue, and all of those tough days that it took to get there. But this movement is worth fighting for. This movement is something that, if this is the reason that you're changing your career path and deciding to become an entrepreneur, deciding to join a company whose mission is to make the planet healthier and safer, that is powerful, and that will help you persevere. So, trust that gut instinct and trust that desire and will to be mission oriented and do something meaningful, and just get after it. There's no better time than now, and the clock is ticking. So, just buckle in and keep that in mind, that it's for a greater purpose and a bigger cause. So, yeah.
Man, this has been fantastic. I'm really been inspired. You're a great interviewee, excuse me. So everyone, please check out, RZero. This has been Grant Morgan, the co-founder and CEO at RZero. Shoot a message on LinkedIn. Check out their website. And man, thanks for your time today. Just keep up the great work. This is fantastic.
Thank you. And one more thing, Charlie, if I have a second, but one shameless plug, South by Southwest this year, we're hosting a panel that I think all your listeners would be really interested in. So the topic of the panel, so we got selected to be a featured session. So it's like a keynote, and it's 4 p.m. Central Time on March 15th. So I'll be moderating, but you're going to want to hear from the panelists more. The topic is public health tech is coming for you. And the premise of it is, what are the changes that we as a society need to make from a policy perspective, the innovation that we need, and the changes that we as a society need to adopt and enact in order to come out of COVID healthier, stronger, better than ever before, and build a new normal. But the panelists we have Dr. Eli Babari, who's the head of infectious disease at the Mayo Clinic, one of the top infectious disease physicians in the world. We have Dr. Joseph Allen from Harvard's T.H. Chan School of Public Health, literally wrote the book on healthy buildings. And then we also have Joanna Frank, who's the founder and CEO of the Center for Active Design, and who maintains the Fitwell certification as well. So all incredible thought leaders, and it should be a really, really interesting discussion about how we see the future and the changes we need to make. And I'm really excited for it. So we'll be streaming it with South by. We'll be streaming it. But if you're there, drop in and say hi.
Wow. All right. We're going to link over to that. That's a great panel. And everybody check that out. This is going to be awesome. I just want to say thank you to our loyal listeners. We actually are celebrating over 1 year here on the Green Building Matters podcast. Me and the entire team were stoked and just so glad you continue to listen every Wednesday morning to a new interview with a green building professional here in this industry, or just some pro tips that we want to make sure that you are getting straight from us, straight to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At GBES.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode. And you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Tell your colleagues. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.